Test sample. First 15. Reading Chapter 3. Killian. As quickly as Killian had found her, she was gone. He had been in awe of the girl from the moment he had turned the corner into that alley, his dragon perking up at the sight of her. He wanted her. Not her naked behind as she searched for something behind the dumpster. Her. Just her. He needed her. Not in his bed, or in his court as was his normal fashion, but with him. Protected. Wanted. His. She was his. The thought tensed through his stomach, heating in his heart as his dragon fire began to burn. His shifter howling inside his mind in need of her. To feel her skin against his, to trace her lips with his tongue, to hold her. To protect her. The new frightening emotions propelled him forward as he chased her. The dreaded man that had opened the door and let her slip out of his grasp more than a few steps behind. "Come back!" Killian grumbled to himself as he turned a corner and faced yet another long, empty hallway. How had he lost her? He was the fastest of his kind. He won every race and defeated every enemy. But this girl was gone. She had bested him. It only made him long for her all the more. "What in the world was that?" The hotel manager grumbled as he came up beside him, having also lost track of the streaming flame of her hair. The balding man was panting, out of breath, as he began to storm away, intent on catching her. A thunder of feet rattled behind him, at least 10 of his staff ready to continue the chase. "Freaking homeless people! They can't just come charging in here! Bringing her filth!" Killian stopped the little man's tirade and his retreat. Before he could move more than a few steps away, his large hand wrapped around the man's wrinkled suit and pulled him back. If this foolish little man thought he could insult the girl, he had another thing coming. Killian's heart rumbled in his ears as he brought the man around to face him, holding him inches away as his nostrils flared. "She is not filth," Killian growled, his voice rumbling alongside his dragon as the beast rose to defend the girl. The manager was intent to rage at him, assuming he had been responsible for the girl's entry. He stopped short, however, any courage he had melting away at the spark of the fire in Killian's eyes. Killian didn't even try to restrain his dragon. He never did. A future king should never disguise his power. His father had made that much clear as he prepared him to take the throne. That was if the old man would die and let him take his place. The thought mixed with the rage Killian felt, his need to defend the girl growing as he released the manager, leaving the man to stumble back, ready to posture Killian, although he was easily twice as large, both in bulk and in height. His mistake. Killian's dragon snarled, his jaws squaring as his temper sparked. "She is with me." Tweaking a smug grin, Killian handed over the same room key he had shown the girl in the alley, the ridiculous advertisement on the back making it clear where it came from. Suite 405. Making sure to emphasize the word suite, Killian fixed him with a look that demanded respect. Even if the manager didn't know who he was, the room number alone should be enough to get the man to shut up. It was bad enough that Killian had been forced to stay in this tiny budget hotel down in the valley. He would much rather find a cave in the mountains. But, considering what he was here for, the more they could blend in, the better. No. The sooner he could get home and away from this stupid mission, the better. It was dangerous enough to be here. He didn't need to be adding a girl to that. Except that he couldn't help it. He wanted her. He had heard enough about this feeling to know exactly what it was, and that alone made everything he was here to do that much more dangerous. It couldn't be. She couldn't be. "Mr. Coulebre," the balding man gasped, pulling Killian away from his thoughts as recognition set in. Straightening his suit, the manager stepped away, trying to make himself look as put together as he could. Not that it would help. The suit was a discount off-the-rack style and could never compare to the perfectly tailored twill masterpiece Killian wore. The suit had cost thousands and had been made by one of the finest tailors in Spain. It was one of Killian's treasures, and he was proud of it, if only because it was what his dragon desired. The fact that it made him look amazing made it that much better. Of all the things to hoard, at least his dragon had good taste. Yes, Killian affirmed, stepping closer as he took one last look around the corner, his heart thundering as it attempted to pull him towards her. And I would expect my guest to be treated with as much respect as your staff had treated me and my... Yes, of course, the bumbling man cut in, bowing his head slightly. Anything for our most esteemed guests. At least the man had his priorities straight. The manager may not know exactly who or what Killian was, but even the mortal could sense the magic in him enough to yield. Then I trust you will leave me to my guest and have your staff return to their work. Killian's voice was hard as he nudged his thumb behind him, pointing to the confused maids and kitchen staff that had joined the race. Yes, the manager blubbered, giving a backwards nod of dismissal to the others. Anything you ask, sir. This man was rubbing it on a little thick, and perhaps it was for good reason. It was clear by the state of the hotel that they didn't see many of Killian's stature here. The suite, if you could call it that, was well appointed, but the furniture was hard and the outcome of a bulk production company somewhere in the States. Usually Killian relied on threats and charm to get his way, but this man crumpled like wet paper, ready to do anything for the Dragon Prince, even if he didn't know it. Wonderful, Killian crooned, stepping past the still bumbling manager, towards where his heart was pulling him. Then I trust you will not get in my way! The last words roared out of him, each consonant drenched in the deep rumble of his dragon. The creature was speaking more to him than to the manager, as it resumed its quest to retrieve its mate. Mate. The word jolted through Killian, stopping his heart with both fear and exhilaration. Shifter mates were a powerful connection of the soul and heart that many spent years searching for, lifetimes protecting. Wolves mated once for life, the mates often dying within hours of each other. Pumas and many other cats were the same. There was nothing stronger than a bond between shifters and their mates. And in the case of a dragon, nothing rarer. Especially for the king. It had been nearly 3 generations since one of the Dragon Kings, the alphas of his kind, had claimed a mate through a soul bond. Soul mates were not meant for a king. They were a sign of weakness. How could a king protect his kind if he was absorbed by a woman? Kings take what they wanted, claimed the woman or women they desired, and kept their heart free to rule, and their bed free for pleasure. It was how his grandfather lived, how his father lived, and a life he had already begun to live. But now, he raced through the halls toward her, every fiber of his soul stretching toward her in need to claim what was his, to whisk her away and connect her dragon to his. The thought made his bones ache for her, his dragon fire pulsing hot in his mouth. He could nearly taste the steam. Hot, moist, sweet like honey. Just like the aroma that had drifted from her. He couldn't seem to move his feet fast enough.
Where are you going in such a hurry?
The woman's voice was sugary and lined with enough ice that if it hadn't already doused the fire that was burning through Killian, the glare in her lavender eyes would have done it anyway. Debria, Killian growled, slowing to a stop, although he did not turn to face the dark figure. The slender woman leaned casually against the beige-striped wallpaper of the hotel as if she belonged there. Although with her perfectly frayed black jeans, tall leather boots, and a black shirt, she could have easily been a smudge of ink against the white. Her long black hair lay in cords around her mahogany skin, making the bright purple of her eyes the only color in the smudge of black. They stood out like lights in the dark, digging right into Killian in an attempt to disable the muscular giant. Her seductive stare whispered over his skin, but for the first time he did not rise. It was her eyes that had drawn his dragon to hers in the first place. The way they sparked in a danger that matched his own had made his human form desire her. Normally, one glance of those lavender eyes and Killian would bend to her, take her, but right then he wanted nothing more than to push her out of the way and continue his pursuit. It was a risk he could not take. Not right now. Not with this woman blocking his path. Dabria was the reason he had been in the alley. He had been awaiting her arrival and a message she had insisted on giving in person. Originally, he had refused her, but her demand had rubbed against him like sandpaper, and he had obliged, knowing he needed to get rid of her, and that the manipulative woman wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. She was not part of his mission in this stinking mortal city, and if she discovered his reason for being here, it could spell more than a little trouble for him. More so if she even caught a whiff of what transpired only moments ago.
I'm not used to having to hunt you down, handsome.
She cooed, her voice a seductive lull as she pushed herself off the wall and stepped towards him, the tap of her heels against the worn carpet hitting against his heart like a nail in a coffin. Killian's fists balled against his thighs like tight little rocks, pressing against his tense muscle in an effort to quiet the storm that was trying to take control. Darting his eyes from Dabria, he took one last glance down the hall towards the invisible string that was tugging at him. The strength of the girl's call was growing quieter by the minute. With every minute Killian wasted with Dabria, he was at risk of losing her. Who knew when their next chance encounter would be? He couldn't risk losing her. But he also couldn't risk upsetting his father and everything he knew of the Dragon Realm screaming at him to be careful. "And I am not used to being summoned by haughty courtiers," Killian said with a snap, far too much of his frustrated rage seeping through his voice as his dragon growled, the air growing cold. She didn't even flinch. She just smiled broader, used to his temper.
Testy, testy.
She teased, her hips swaying as she stepped towards him.
I've never seen you get so upset over a lost hooker before.
Killian's lip twitched, rage and bile rising in his throat as fire boiled in his heart. The bitter taste of ash filled his mouth, every part of him trying to control the anger at hearing the girl, his mate, being spoken about in such a way. Mate. The word, the acceptance of it, calmed his heart, but not enough. The damage was already done. "She is not a hooker!" he barked, leaning towards Dabria as he let his eyes flash with flame, his massive frame threatening to swallow her, crush her into nothing but smoke and ash. The devilish woman didn't even flinch.
You tell yourself that, Killy.
She crooned, stepping right up to him and placing her hands against his hips, the touch burning like ice, even through the heavy layers of fabric.
You know I can give you anything you need.
She whispered the words in his ear, lifting herself up on tippy toes to let her tongue dart out and taste his earlobe. Her hot tongue flicked at the long-since closed piercing, the last remains of a defiant youth. Well, if you didn't count the tattoos.
I am everything you need,
Dabria said, pressing the full length of her body against his, letting him feel every inch of her barely concealed curves. Normally, that would result in him pressing her against the wall and taking her mouth and body. Right then, he would prefer to throw her against the wall and watch her sliding down the bland striped surface in a ball of insolence and punishment. Dabria was the worst person to be here. Her dragon was powerful, and given the right opportunity, could peer into his mind and pull his thoughts as easily as she was reading a book. He needed to be careful. Between the girl and Killian's true purpose for being in the hotel, too much was at stake for the seductress to catch wind of something else going on, and share that news with the king. Dabria may lust after him, and he may have answered those calls on more than one occasion, but he was not a fool. He knew that it was the crown she wanted. Killian was only a vessel for her to get to her goal. Killian's dragon howled in anger as he lifted the woman into his arms, pressing her against the wall as he had always done, using his wide hips to hold her in place as he gathered her tiny wrists in one large hand and held them overhead. "Will you give me anything I need, Dabria?" he crooned, his voice a low rumble, and he leaned into her, running the rough scruff of his jaw against her. She shivered against the touch, moaning and melting into him. Killian was good at this, at turning women to putty in his hands, both in the sheets and out. It was a benefit to both, a lustful tango of pleasure and desire. Except this time Killian felt nothing. Nothing but the roaring anger of his dragon, the pulling pain of his heart taking him into another direction. The lust was gone. The need had never arrived. It was physically painful to be this close to another woman after he had felt so much with her. The girl. He didn't even know her name. That fact alone only made his longing grow.
Anything.
Dabria breathed, her voice catching in her throat as he pressed against her, his dragon continuing to scream, demanding to rip her head off rather than continue the charade. Then I wish, Killian gasped, his voice husky as he pressed her hand harder against the wall, letting his breath roll over the hollow beneath her ear, sending a chill down her spine. Dabria moaned, the escaped steam of his dragon awakening hers. The sound stabbed against Killian's heart, causing whatever thick band that was keeping his anger in check to snap. He was done with her, and her games. Killian pressed against her harder, the moan turning into a gasp as the air was forced from her lungs. Then I wish for you to tell me whatever nonsense you needed to tell me and leave my sight. Any forced seduction had left Killian's voice, leaving behind only the rage and frustration that was brewing inside. He knew he should conceal it more, but the damage was already done, and her violet eyes snapped to his, shifting to the blue ice of her dragon that she was known for.
You will choose a mortal over me?
She seethed, affronted as she slipped out of his grasp.
You will choose the mortal whore?
The word was a hot knife through his soul. It sucked the air from his lungs and any logical thinking from his mind. There was only the dangerous growl of his dragon as it rattled in his chest, the sound vibrating the walls and run-down light fixtures.
She must have the breasts of the gods.
Dabria snarled, her lip curling as she leaned into him, daring him to counter. Everything in Killian wanted to explode, to rip her limb from limb and cast her aside. But she had gone too far. She smelled too much, forcing his temper and his dragon to back down.